Hi.
Hi, Megan. How are you?
Good, good.
Good.
So I have to ask, you mentioned last class that you have twins. Are they identical or are they fraternal?
Fraternal.
Okay. And then
Yeah.
your brothers are identical, is what you said,
Yeah,
right?
my brother's sons are identical. Yeah.
So do you
Two of us.
do your own studies on them?
I have, but not formal. They've been informal.
Yeah.
But yeah, one of the really good things that has happened, right? Especially recognizing how psychology plays a role.
Mhm.
When my wife is a guidance counselor, and so one of her pet peeves is being on time. She never likes to be late for anything.
Yes.
Well, when the twins were 6, just getting ready for first grade, right? So they went first grade, and because of her pet peeve, and we lived close enough to the school that she always wanted to drop them off in the morning.
Mhm.
Well, so of course, Monday morning she would get up and she would say, "Come on, come on, come on, get up, get up, get up, get up! Gotta be, don't want to be late for school. Don't want to be late for school." And what I heard was, get up because your weekend is over,
Yeah.
right? And so, even adults, our Fridays and Sundays,
Yeah.
they're very they're very close. And Mondays is that go back to work thing. So I saw the way that they responded. So I asked her, I said, well, rather than asking them to get up to not be late for school, ask them to get up to help mom not be late for work.
Mm.
Right. So because of their affinity to their
Mhm.
mom,
Mhm.
now there was a benefit to making mom happy.
Yeah.
And so, these little 6-year-olds started getting up and laying their clothes out.
Aw,
Yeah,
that's so
of
sweet.
course they had to be had to be corrected, but the idea was then there was a purpose.
Yeah.
So they didn't associate school as bad. Now, mom's work is bad, but if we can help mom be happy with that, then we're good. And I've always said I didn't care if they hated her work. I didn't want them to hate school.
Yes.
Yeah. And so it
Yeah.
actually changed the dynamic.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah. So there are things that I've been able to try as a result of what I've been learning.
Mhm.
But I try not to do it formal because, of course, they're smart enough to know when I'm
Yeah.
trying to manipulate them. Yes. Serene,
Hi, how are you?
I loved that story.
Thank
You, you and Megan had me about to cry up in here, and I was like, wait a minute, I can't read anymore right now.
you. Oh, I'm really glad you liked it.
Aaron, you look like a poster.
I need some sunshine in my life with this rain, so I'm faking
let's
it with the background.
let's all go to Aaron's. We're gonna do the class at Aaron's. Excellent. All right. So we are finishing chapter 2, or we're just into we're into chapter 3. All right, because we stopped here at the neural pruning and brain plasticity slide. So we are going to move from there into the rest of chapter 3 and possibly get into 4, but we'll see and we'll play it by ear. Okay, so let me share that with you guys. All right, there we are. And so we were looking at neural pruning and brain plasticity, and remembering that we have the brain plasticity simply says our existing neural network can be reconfigured, right? Back to the Phineas Gage story about the spear going through his eye and through his brain, right? So even though he had that traumatic event, his brain reconfigured itself to allow him to still function. So even with, there being dead parts of our brain, different lobes, we can still reconfigure and the brain can still function. And now maybe not to its fullest capacity, but to a certain percentage. And then of course, the idea of neurogenesis is that as long as we learn and continue to have experiences that are different than those that don't fit with the neural network that exists, we can literally create new neurons. Now, the other thing, and I did some research after the class, that we lose 500 million or more cells per day. But that's as a result of waste products and additional things. So those need to be replenished. So we really do have a cycling of our neural network and creation of new neurons, as long as we have new experiences and we function without it to the point of being deteriorating, so that we have no value anymore, right? So the idea of use it or lose it actually is real. Now, part of this, because as a child, a lot of their development is still being created. So if we look at the idea of neural networks, right, when you're first born, you have a large mass, it's not extremely large, but you have a large mass of neural networks. Well, I would believe that because we're still in that blueprint phase, where not only the structure of the body, but the functions of different areas of the bodies are still being formed, then a lot of the subconscious programming, those neural networks that are associated with subprogramming, are still functioning. So you have a lot of those. And then as a result of birth, now you have conscious recognition. And so you have new neurons that are recognizing those experiences. So between conscious and subconscious, we're still being formed and developed. Once you get to around the age of 2 to 3, you actually lose quite a few of those neural pathways. Now, it's not that they don't come back, but you lose about 50% of those. And I presuppose that because the majority of the internal organs are formed, then the use of those same subprogramming processes aren't as needed. And just as with anything else, the brain, when it has certain information, and it knows that, just like cookies on your computer, when you go to the internet and it says we use cookies. Well, going back to the story of Hansel and Gretel, they dropped cookies or breadcrumbs because now the next time they were going to that site or going back to their origin, they knew how to get there. Well, cookies and this idea is the same in the brain, but the brain creates mapping for your thoughts and your actions. And the more that you repeat something, the higher the intensity or the stronger that neural pathway is. So as we learn new things, now the response for the neural pathways represent those new things, but as well, once they become habitual, the brain does not put as much energy toward that development or that memory. It's established, right? So the stimulation, which would be those experiences that we have internal and external, and so that actually creates what our neural pathways are going to be for certain signals. And as with anything else, we have certain neurons that are specifically identified for certain functions. And as a result, they become almost static in how they perform. Now, as we said before, your personality may become static around the age of 19, plus or minus a couple of years. However, your behavior changes your entire life. So you may use foundational constructs to make decisions, but your interaction with others are going to continue your entire life. So the idea that the brain continues to prune, continues to have neurogenesis, continues neuroplasticity, that happens as long as you have additional experiences and aren't at a point where the brain no longer functions properly, right? So that is going to continue. Well, part of that happening is formed even at the very beginning. Because you would think, and of course now being in a psychology class, or those who you've taken nursing classes, I mean, you know that all of the things that are happening, even for a newborn, are ways of developing, whether it's muscles, whether it's brain tissue, whatever it is, all of those things are for a development purpose or development cycle. So the first reflexes, if you remember back to Piaget said the first phase of development is sensory motor. And if it's sensory motor, then in his theory, it indicates that everything that a child is learning, generally from birth to about the age of 1.5, is as a result of sensory perception and motor development. Because really the only vocal communication that a brand new baby has, is crying. Everything else, coo, babbling, all of those things come about, but the only real communication signal that is interpreted with true meaning is crying. And it can only mean, well, it can mean several things, but one of 3 specific things. I'm hungry, I'm in pain, and I need attention, right? So that's universal. So a child, even because, again, remember that a child's vision, or a baby, when first born, a baby's vision is between 2,400 and 2,600. So the other senses are really the way that it interacts with this external environment. So rooting, if you put anything in front of a child, the first thing they do is try to grab it and put it in their mouth, right? So even that is a form of development and recognition of the external environment. The sucking and grasping, as Freud said, the oral fixation or the grasping is muscular development. And as we talked about before, since we're looking at the formation of our bodies, it works from the interior to the exterior, right? It goes from the main areas to the more discrete areas. So even grasping things teaches functionality of the fingers and discrete motion, so that the brain is actually learning that function for discrete motion and activity. And so each of these functions that are there, now notice gradually reflexes, our sensory interaction, are replaced by operant condition adaptive behaviors. So what does operant conditioning mean? We talked about it briefly. So when a child is now, instead of reflexes, is being operant conditioned, what does that mean?
So if the mother responds every time they cry by giving them a bottle, then they know that that's what they get, or a boob, whichever you want. That's what they get when they cry. If they don't respond with that, then they give them a different message, I guess.
Yeah, and that's absolutely right. That's absolutely right, because remember, operant conditioning is about consequences. And so if the consequences are positive, then we tend to repeat the behavior. If the consequences are negative, then we tend to diminish the behavior, right? So those reflexes that are subconscious, right, as a result of their genetic programming, now gets replaced with nurture, which is consequences based on the external environment and their interaction with that external environment. So you bring up a good point, and we will call it breastfeeding instead of boob feeding. But the genetics of it, you think about
I apologize.
Oh, no, that's okay. That's all right. That's okay. In the South, a boob is somebody who's not very smart. So we'll have to qualify it. All right. But the idea is that for 9 months, that child has existed in an environment that is completely dependent on the mother's, not only her biological and chemical, but physical being. And so everything that, well, we should say at least the majority of things that are mom are being transferred chemically to the child. So breastfeeding means that there is a continuance of not only antibodies that are transferred from mom to the child, but also those chemical purities and the additional things that are going to promote nutrients and stuff within that child's body, right? So think of it this way: if you have plants, right, there are certain types of nutrients or chemicals or whatever you're going to do, and let's not say chemicals, I don't like that term, a certain kind of plant food that are for specific plants. And as long as you continue to nourish them with that, their growth is more prominent. But if you substitute that with something else, then it is likely that part of those nutrients are going to be missed. Now, I'm not saying it's an absolute necessity for anyone to breastfeed. However, for a child's development, chemically, the nutrients and all of those that it has been used to and conformed to for 9 months is going to be more prevalent through breastfeeding than it, is through other means. Doesn't mean that Similac and other types of milk aren't good. It's just that the milk does not have the DNA properties that mom has. So breastfeeding is always going to be more effective for a child's development than supplemental materials. Okay, now survival may also be confounded. And remember, confounded said simply that we're changing the nature of the outcome because there are things that we aren't necessarily either aware of or that we didn't prepare for. So survival may also be confounded by maternal commitment and social class, right? And whether it is fortunate or unfortunate, and some of you have put these in your stories, that you grew up in an environment where even getting food may have been significantly difficult, right? And so the access to nutrients, supplements, and the kind of things that will promote development, dependent on socioeconomic class, may be more evident. It is not a given that because you're in a low socioeconomic status that you don't have access to food and those kind of things. I grew up on a farm, and now we were not even middle class, but we had a half acre to an acre that was a garden. So potatoes, peanuts, corn, everything that you could possibly eat was there. And then we had cows and chickens and hogs and all of that. So the only time we had to go to the supermarket was to get sugar or salt and pepper. Everything else was grown on the farm. So socioeconomic status didn't put us in a confounding position. But there are others who don't have access to those things, and subsequently, body function can be underdeveloped as a result of that. Now, I hope you guys remember this, but it says that even looking at social class or maternal commitment is correlational. So what does that mean? If it's only correlational, what does that mean?
That it's not necessarily like a cause, but it could also like relate to one another.
Yes, very good, thank you. So remember, correlation is not causation. So just because we can look at this and say that, a mother who, just smothers the child with love and affection and passion does not necessarily mean that the child is going to develop, based on its genetic environment. But what we tend to see is that someone who does provide a lot of love and security and caring for the child, development tends to also be higher in measure. So we can look at the two, and one does not necessarily cause the other, but we see the relationships either promoted or diminished as a result of those two variables and the relationship that they have, existing within the same period, but neither necessarily causes the other. And that's the idea here. So social class does not necessarily cause or has to be a confounding variable. It depends on the environment and the way that group worked within that environment. Maternal physical discomfort and work demands often reduce breastfeeding length, right? So now again, the number of nutrients and antibiotics that are transferred from mom's body may be diminished. So now, is there a way for the child to get those supplements? And if he or she doesn't, does it affect their development? We don't necessarily know, but correlationally, we can say that if the amount of antibiotics and other supplements that are provided to the child can reduce the effectiveness of their immune system, right? And some of the things that can happen as a result of that can be these things. It can be, again, malnutrition, right? Because the nutrients and the things that are necessary in order to promote a healthy body aren't available. And, stunting, meaning that the bones and the other parts of the body that are responsible for extending or expanding don't expand to their full potential. So these things can still happen. And then food insecurity. Ooh, what do you think that means? This is going to be a good one.
Is it the not right food you're supposed to eat?
Serene, that is the best general answer I could receive. Now give me one more specific.
How about not knowing when or where your food's going to come from?
Okay, all right, that's the start. I'll take it a little bit further.
Not being able to rely on your caregiver because they're not taking care of you.
Not so much. Well, and let's go back to what Megan said. And we can use part of that, Jessica, in that we may not know where the food comes, which also means we don't know what's in the food,
Mm-hmm.
right? So think of the idea of organic versus inorganic, right? Does anyone know what the difference is? The real difference? Remember, I'm a farm boy, so don't try me. Okay, Megan was going to give it a try, but she's like, nah, maybe I won't.
I mean, supposedly it's crops that pesticides aren't used on it, but I think that it's kind of we're sold a false bill of goods with that a little bit.
Yeah. So
in order to get people to pay a lot of money for it.
Yep, and that's the false definition, right? And you're absolutely right. It's a false definition because organic does not mean whether or not they use pesticides or not. Pesticides tend to relate to genetically modified, the growth and expansion and or, diminished value because you're using chemicals in it. Or organic, the true form of organic, because the soil automatically has certain nutrients that are produced as a result of the plants that are grown on it. So just like we take in oxygen and release nitrogen, well, certain plants, peanuts, soybeans, whatever they are, they release certain nutrients into the ground and they take others out.
That's why you rotate crops, correct?
Yes, that's exactly why. Because after a couple of years, the crops that if you don't rotate them, they continue to take the same nutrients out of the ground. And so what you do is look for a plant or a crop that is the opposite. So now instead of taking out vitamin C and vitamin D, it puts in vitamin C and D and takes out the other that's been replenished. And so that's the real idea behind organic food. The other is just manufactured. When they throw in pesticides, people say, oh, they didn't use pesticides, must be organic. Nope. They could have been growing the same crop for 10 years, which means you still aren't getting the same nutrients from the food that you should get. So food insecurity is that, not knowing, am I getting the nutrients from the food that I need? Are there pesticides? Has it been GMO, right? Genetically modified, right? So in the absence of knowing where the nutrients are coming from, we feed a child assuming that he or she is getting the right nutrients. And in fact, it's not there, right? So that's the idea behind food insecurity. Now, moving a little bit further, and we're not going to really, guys, don't worry about remembering this because, it's just general information. But this idea, trying to change the nature of food for children. An interesting fact, one that is not, a positive note, but 50% of children in the US who are obese are in Texas.
What?
50% of the entire childhood population that are considered obese are in Texas.
It's funny when you walk down the aisle of the supermarket and you look at those little labels that say WIC on them or whatever, the stuff that they've put that are supposedly approved,
Mm-hmm.
it's some of it you're like, what? They won't cover spinach, but they'll cover Coca-Cola. I mean,
Yeah,
what?
yeah. And there's a wonderful documentary if you guys watch. I love documentaries. There's an absolute wonderful one on Netflix, and it talks about the organic industry and how they're finding that the approval, because a lot of other countries produce food that come to the US and are placed on the markets, on the shelves, but their organic process for approval is non-existent. And so literally all they do is put organic on the label. Someone sees organic and they don't realize that absolutely none of the controls for managing that are put in place for where that's coming from. Interesting note, but again, I like those kind of things. All right, so stunting. So look at the trends in stunting, meaning that the bone structure and the bodies are effectively stunted. They aren't growing to their full capacity. So 1990, if we look at this, in developing countries, it tends to be flattened, right? Because we have more information about nutrition and how to apply that. But look where it was. Stunting, the percent, 50% in Asian countries for babies not reaching their full potential, and 25% in Latin American countries and Caribbean. Right now, fortunately, that's significantly diminished now in 2020, but that it could very easily change. One of the things that's private and personal for me is I use honey on cuts and bruises, because organic honey has properties will actually allow it to heal better. And then for a drink, because it has healing properties. But even the bee industry is being diminished because people are mass producing honey that is not from bees, or they're mass producing bees and not allowing them to pollinate the same. And so the same properties for honey are being diminished. And there's another documentary on that as well, about why honey now is nothing more than sugar water. So also an interesting thing. But again, the idea is that as we look at the developmental cycle, nutrients are important, right? Because remember we said before, genetics is really a function of chemical properties associated with particular cells. And those cells, as a result of those chemical properties, are designated to function as, or for bone growth, or for hair, or for skin, or for muscle, or for whatever it is. So if we start to have chemicals put into our food that contradicts that natural chemical state of the cells, then it can create a developmental issue. All right. So again, the first stage of communicating for a child to make the external environment aware of what he or she is feeling or sensing is crying. Now, crying does a couple of things, and we talked about it before. So it can be an alert signal. It can be an indicator that they're hungry, an indicator that they're in pain, right? An indicator that they want attention. But crying also increases lung capacity. So crying, and if you think about it, even now, if you cry, your breathing changes. And so children are actually using their crying as an increase in lung capacity. And notice here, and it declines around 4 months with cortex development, right? So part of that cortex development is also back to the operant conditioning, because the more my prefrontal cortex develops, the more I have the ability to associate experiences. Now, again, we aren't at the point for creating a conscious memory, but consequences, we can see when somebody smiles at us or not, makes a face or not, does certain things or not. So crying normally peaks as a subconscious function and then becomes more of a conscious function after around 4 months. Now, this idea of being colic is absolutely real. Now, generally it happens during the first 3 months, but it can occur even through the first and second year. So it depends on the lung capacity and how well crying has been used as a development function as opposed to just one for operant interaction. So, and this was the last one, motivation with crying for crying changes with age, right? Back to conditioning. So if I learn, as you said, Megan, if I learn that crying gets me what I want, then whenever I don't get what I want, I'm going to cry. And there's a lot of adults who do the same thing. Oh, I'm not getting my way. I will yell, I will scream, I will cry, I will do whatever. And one of the unfortunate side effects of that, especially from a negative connotation, is someone who has been rewarded for negative behavior because they've conditioned that that negative behavior gets them attention. If they stop getting attention for the negative behavior, they don't tend to conform by stopping the negative behavior, they increase it. Because I've been conditioned to believe that negative behavior gets me attention. So if that's no longer getting it at the same level, then I need to increase the negative behavior. It's the opposite effect of what you would think you'd get by decreasing the consequence associated with it, or the normal consequence. All right. So motivation for crying changes with age because of consequences that we recognize. So this idea of quieting a baby, right, still fits with this idea of genetic predisposition, sensory information, again, Piaget, when it's sensory motor. So the child rocking, picking up, feeding, satisfying, all of those things are developmental, but they are genetically ingrained. So even the idea of warmth and comfort by rocking a child or holding a child close to you or something like that, skin to skin contact, this kangaroo care, right? Always carrying the child around and making sure that they're always connected. And then of course, even for adults, guys, even for adults, it is recommended. Now, take this for what it's worth, but it is recommended that at least once a month, you get a massage. Because the body actually promotes and creates positive hormones when there is skin to skin touch, right? And it doesn't have to be skin to skin, it could be hand to skin, whatever it is, but a massage actually causes each part of the body to create positive hormones associated with happiness and satisfaction. And so, of course, if you're not in a close relationship, then the alternative is to at least once a month get a massage. I know Massage Envy owes me money, but I'll check with them later. All right.
Question.
Yes, go right ahead.
So with babies, you have to comfort them and, always have them by your side. Why do some people say that, like, if the baby's crying, you just leave it alone sometimes?
Because they're idiots. No, I'm playing. No, because some school of thought, some psychologists believe that it creates too high a level of dependency if you always satisfy the need. Because now you're conditioning them to always have their needs satisfied. And so some think that creates too great of a dependency. And so some will say, oh, let them cry. It's good for them. Well, it's not necessarily that it's good for them. It's that that's the way that they're trying to condition them to become independent versus dependent. And others simply say, look, until the first 4 or 5 years, and especially during the first or second year, a child is supposed to be dependent. That's the nature of it. They can't talk, think, and do all of those things. And so crying is a signal that my body requires attention. So I absolutely disagree with someone in the first 2 years that if a child cries, not a tantrum, right, but a child cries, that there's a need associated with that needs to be addressed. That's my thought, yeah. And
I had a question.
I know, but I forgot that I'm recording this, so I just call people idiots on a recording. Okay. All right.
Question.
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Is it possible for like a child to get too attached to their mom and stuff like that? Like, what if like because like now a lot of like moms like go back to work and stuff like that, so like they hire a babysitter, and
Yep.
like, is it possible for like the baby not to react good to that? Or
It's absolutely possible. Absolutely possible. And in the attachment theory, one of the areas that's addressed is that there is a sense of security, comfort, care, and trust that's associated by that interaction between mom and the child. And if that is severed, then the child may feel like that level of security doesn't exist anymore. And there's a natural proclivity for independence. And so now if I'm not being satisfied with this relationship, then the relationship maybe doesn't have value. Some children will become more enamored and connected with their babysitter and with their au pair or something like that than they do with the parent, because they only see the parent as a part-time satisfier, and then the person that's spending the majority of the time with them become the one that really does provide that security and attachment. Yeah, so it is absolutely possible.
I have a question with that.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
So, for example, I mean, obviously, everybody has seen I have a little one. So I've been trying to figure out, and I don't know, I guess just kind of like guess how it'll turn out for people like in my situation where now I'm home all the
Yeah.
time with the baby. I only work 2 days a week.
Mm-hmm.
So when he gets bigger, like it makes me wonder, like, how is that gonna, like, have you heard anything anywhere on like how they think that that's gonna affect like so many of the babies that are born and coming up during this time where they have a parent home with them all the time, and then when they start school, is that going to be a major issue because we can't do as much like we would with previous age groups and stuff to socialize them?
Yeah, I will give you the psychological answer. It depends. And that's not to skirt around the question, but imprinting happens during really the first few weeks and the first years of complete dependence. So if you, as a good mom, right, you make sure that their needs are met when those needs, not just once, but the needs are there. And then, as Erickson says, provide a little independence. Allow for them to take a few risks, right? Give them that opportunity to become individuals, but with the realization that you're just around the corner if needed, right? Sometimes it's good to put the child in a room, right, and walk out, but you have to temper that, because if you do it irregularly, then they assume that you're leaving. And children really do have that connection that is huge, that attachment. But if you do it periodically and show that that separation is minimized because I will be back, I will come back, as they get older, now they've had conditioning that allows them to recognize that your separation does not mean that you are lost or gone, right? So you can build that into the equation. Someone who satisfies every need and want, now the child doesn't have an additional outlet, and he or she may not develop their level of independence. So now the idea of taking a risk is daunting when the caregiver isn't there. And that's why I say it depends. So yeah, you can absolutely, you have an opportunity, I think, and I think this is really the best. It's unfortunate that COVID is causing this to happen, but children who tend to have a close parental connection in the first 4 to 5 years tend to be more socially capable after those 5 years. Yeah, right. Because they're more secure, their independence, they're willing to take risks, they have a different level of confidence, right? Because now they've taken risks, but somebody's been there to sort of mitigate the danger associated with those risks. So I think from research, those who have had a strong parental influence for the first 4 to 5 years, those children tend to be more socially adaptable as they get older. So yeah, that's why I say it depends, but yeah, I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. Okay, cool. So relax, Mom, you're okay. All right, so looking at sleeping. Now remember that sleeping really is a function of restoration, when your body repairs itself, and when those sub-programs that Dr. Lipton talked about occur. right? So as an analogy, when do, for large organizations in large buildings, when do they normally go in and clean up the buildings?
At nighttime.
Why at night? Why not during
Because
the day?
there's no people there, so you can get the job done like faster.
Okay, whomever that, never mind. Okay, got it. All right, so yeah, because most of the activity, right? Most of the activity that detracts from cleaning happens during the day, right? So, and if you try to clean during the day, then the activities that are still going on are going to create more crap and more trash and more stuff. So once the majority of the activity has subsided, then the people that are going in to clean up things, fix things, put them back in their respective order, right? Develop these areas and clean them and put them again in their functional positions. That happens when the majority of the activity is gone. It's the same thing in our bodies for sleep. Because during the day, from the time that you wake up to the time you go to sleep, your brain is using 90% of its function to exist. So all of those activities are continually happening. So to try to repair and restore and to do the things that it needs to do, it collides with all of those activities. So sleep really does have a particular function, a very specific function in allowing our bodies to restore and repair itself while we're asleep.
And
And
I just my son just got a lecture, he's 21, from the doctor about sleeping during certain times, because during that portion your brain only does certain functions. So like if you go to sleep at 4 in the morning and get up at 12 noon, your body's not going to be able to perform those functions that it would have 10 p.m. and 8 a.m.
Yeah, and the beauty and the challenge to that is, because we think we're so smart as humans, we try to trick nature. So there's some research done that says an hour and a half after the sun goes down, you should go to sleep, because it maps specifically to our circadian rhythms, our natural circadian rhythms. And then when the sun comes up, you should be an hour and a half after the sun comes up, you should be up and moving and shaking. Because we're so smart, what we do is we trick the brain and we turn on lights. So now the sun's gone down, but our body still says, wait a minute, it's still light. It's not time to go to sleep. And so what happens is you cause an impact to your circadian rhythm. People who do shift work, and I know nurses and other people have to do shifts, but when you transition where your circadian rhythm says you're supposed to be asleep, but for 8 hours you're working, if you travel from the East Coast to the West Coast for long periods of time, the change in the time signatures affect your circadian rhythms. And I can't remember, so you guys help me, but when we were talking about neurons, did I talk about this specifically, what happens during the 4th stage, sleep? Okay, all right, so let me draw that quickly. Well, I'll just draw it, we don't have to be quick, it's our class. All right, so as I said, neurons, so if I have a terminal button that is transmitting electrochemical information, neurotransmitters, to a receiving neuron, then when the neurotransmitters enter into the synaptic gap, and I think you guys remember that, but when it enters into the synaptic gap, there are enzymes in this gap that break down the outer structure, the vesicles that are carrying the neurotransmitters. And so these neurotransmitters flood the synaptic gap. And these are the signals, the chemical messengers that are going to be received into the receiving neuron. Well, what happens is once they have satisfied the request of the receiving neuron, then whatever is left, there's a process called reuptake. And those go back into the sending neuron. And they stay there until the next transmission is going to happen. Well, during your fourth stage sleep, your REM sleep, during the fourth stage sleep, the gap between sending and receiving neurons, or I should say it differently, these neurons literally shrink in size. They shrink, and since they shrink, there is a much larger synaptic gap. And only during fourth stage sleep does the brain produce a chemical, and I for the life of me cannot remember the name of the chemical, but it is only produced during the fourth stage sleep. That chemical is effectively body wash for the brain. That chemical floods every area of the brain and effectively cleans the remaining transmitters, neurotransmitters that are in the synaptic gap. Now, one of the reasons that if this doesn't happen, it is considered part of what promotes Alzheimer's and dementia. Because if those areas continue to be, let's say this transmission only leaves this, but the next transmission leaves this, and then the next transmission, if it doesn't get cleaned out as a result of sleep, then at some point this is just going to be like a battery on your car. This corrosion is going to stop the propagation of signal strength from here to the next area. And just like your car won't start, your brain doesn't start in that particular area, right? So sleep is very important, not only because the subprograms are what take over when you're in your fourth stage sleep, and your conscious really separates, it shuts down. So the subconscious processes for doing this kind of stuff and then repairing and restoring your body to its balance, if you don't get enough sleep, if you don't get that fourth stage sleep, then this doesn't happen. And so even for a child, he or she need a certain amount of sleep, not only for conscious interaction, but for subconscious interaction. And during these first 3 months, you know, the majority of interaction that a child is having is in the development phase. So he or she is mostly using their subprogram function, because everything external is really minimized. So from 3 to 6 months, notice the days for during the day, a 2 week, in those first 2 weeks, the child sleeps over 6 hours during the day, and then another 7 hours at night. So 13 to 14 hours of a baby's day in the first 2 weeks is asleep. And then every now and then becoming conscious, because remember, subconscious programs take over when the conscious separates. So if a child is awake, it minimizes the amount of time that the subconscious is doing what Dr. Lipton called subprogramming, and using the programs that are already there. As they get to 3 months, now 5 hours during the day, because now more conscious interaction, but the development cycle is still happening. So to offset all of these experiences and learning, plus the subprograms, now at 3 months, they're sleeping almost 8 hours a night. And that is a requirement, a general requirement, because that's when most of what's happening for the developmental cycles are occurring. And then as they become 6 months, again, less sleep during the day because there's more conscious activity that's happening. But as a result of that conscious activity, now the brain has to also manipulate what was learned and the experiences and the creation of prefrontal cortex and those neurons that are responsible for memory. Those things are being formed. And so there's just as much sleep or more when they're at the 6 month stage. And once they get to about a year, year and a half, now there's much more conscious activity. And so the amount of sleep can diminish, but it still should stay between 6 to 8 hours a night. Interestingly enough, when you get to an age of like 70 or 80, then this actually reverses and you should go back pretty much to this pattern because the body needs more reparation and restoration time. All right. So that's the idea there. Now, so sleep. Infant sleep physiologically different than an adult pattern. So when a child goes to sleep, as soon as their eyes are closed, they're in dream state. For adults, you go through 4 stages, right? First, you go through the stage of feeling a little drowsy, which tends to be between the first and stage. It's really when you learn the best, because your learning frequency is called theta. And theta is when you learn, when your brain is most susceptible to new information. Once you enter into the 3rd stage sleep, before going into REM sleep, now that's where the conscious disconnects and the subconscious connects. And any transference from conscious state to the subconscious happens during that period. And then it is reinforced in the 4th stage sleep, which is why you can have dreams of what happened during the day. Now, primary sleep stage until adolescence. Once you get to around the age of 12 or 13, now that last biological shift, you pretty much finalize, for the most part, all of the sub-programming that is going to be responsible for your development. Again, the prefrontal cortex is a function that continues for women until around the age of 23 and men till 25. But a woman has pretty much achieved her maximum height around the age of 17 or 18. For males, they may not reach their maximum height generally until around the age of 21. So all of the other sub-processes are pretty much finished. Okay, all right. So chronic sleep problems created by bidirectional parent-child impact, right? So in some instances, the parents are doing things that disallow the child to have a good night's sleep, or the environment doesn't promote it, or the child is not comforted or satisfied for his or her needs. And so if that's the case, then it, again, as the body learns, it normalizes what it learns. And if chronic sleep patterns, not being able to sleep at night, then it can manifest itself into a sleep disorder. So the person environment fit is important because that specifically addresses what is the environment that allows the child to develop in a normal, or what we would call a normal fashion, based on genetics and environment. But if you're in an environment that does not promote that, then it's going to be the opposite effect, which could cause disorders, dysfunction, right? And even simply dissatisfaction. So the idea of the person environment fit, that's what it means, okay? And Aaron, let's go back to you, since, and this is about the question you asked before, right? The person environment fit, right? So as long as you create a secure environment and let the child know that their attachment is secure, the comfort and their abilities to become independent and learn certain things is secure, then the majority of the time you will find that that will propagate into what we would consider a normal child interaction and normal development.
Okay.
I had a question.
Yes, Serene? Yeah.
So you were saying how in the first to second year of their life is the most important. So if we have to, I mean, I know someone right now who's having who has a baby and she has to constantly be with her all the time.
Yeah.
So can a woman pretty much not like work, I guess, the first 2 years? Because I mean, the baby pretty much cries every day, second of the day. He always has something he wants, you know?
Yeah. Now remember, there's, that child could be colicky, right? So that is a natural genetic function for crying. And for some reason, some children, they don't get through that phase as quick as others. But if the child, and I don't know your friend, but if the child's needs are not being met regularly, then the child's impression is that my signal for attention is crying. So if there's any neglect, that could promote it.
Well,
right? If there's overt neglect. Go ahead.
well, wouldn't their needs need to be met like when you say regularly, those pretty much need to be met like every couple hours, right? And throughout the day.
Well, whenever the child's awake.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And for a baby, I mean, because remember, their only interaction with the external world is through their senses.
Hmm.
And so when they're awake, that's the only time that they have interaction with the external world. The other times, everything is internal.
So they pretty much need to be there with them throughout those first 2 years constantly.
Well, it doesn't have to be 24/7, but again, you want to make sure that whenever, and sometimes it's patterned, right? Sometimes you know pretty much when the child wakes up, he or she is going to be hungry. You know within a couple of hours, they're going to be hungry again, right? So once you establish that rhythm, now just like operant conditioning, you can establish a routine that the child also becomes used to, and then he or she will respond to that conditioning. But if you change it up regularly, then the child doesn't know and hasn't created a pattern of when to expect or accept certain behaviors. So then you actually promote the child crying because there is no status quo. Right?
I know as well, in some, well, in many countries like Sweden, they want or they promote parents being home with the child for at least the first 2 years by giving paid time off so that
Yeah.
either the mother or the father is there for that. I mean, they put an emphasis on that time to have a
Yeah.
parent there by giving that opportunity.
I know and I don't know them all, but I know in several countries that I've visited, when you have a child, you get the first year off. You don't work for the first year. If you have a child, you don't work for the first year. When I went to Australia for their military, if you get married, you get the first year off. Right? So they actually promote the idea of relationships and attachment in the first year. We, being a developed country, seem to be backwards in that. Yeah, but you're right. Okay. So all right, so here's the sleep rhythms and the patterns I was talking about. So in an adult, these are the natural stages that you go through. So first, of course, you're awake, and I think these are alpha waves. And then during stage 1 into stage 2, they're theta. And so theta is the place where most learning happens. So even subconsciously, the body forming and growing and learning itself happens there. Now, because a child is not really learning, a child is really reacting to its sub-programs. So a child immediately goes into stage 4. They don't go through these. They go to stage 4, and the sub-programming takes over, and the formation of the body happens. As they get older, then they will start to go through cognitive learning phases because now they recognize operant conditioning and consequences. So then they will start. So adults go through all 4 stages. Now, there's also for adults a stage 5. In stage 5, or what is touted as stage 5, is when you have sleep disorders. So when you walk in your sleep, you talk in your sleep, do those kind of things, the normalized function for sleep would be that you go to sleep and the conscious separates and the subconscious engages. What's supposed to happen when you're coming out of the 4th stage sleep is that the subconscious is supposed to disengage, but it sends a signal to the conscious to reconnect. Sometimes the conscious says, I'm not ready. So if you've ever experienced sleep paralysis, when you actually feel like you're looking around the room, but your muscles won't move, during the 3rd stage of sleep, the large muscles of the body are paralyzed. And the idea is you don't want the large muscles acting while you're dreaming, and otherwise you'll end up falling off the bed or doing stuff while you're supposed to be asleep. So the large muscles become paralyzed. Rapid eye movement, because the smaller muscles, so your eyes actually blink more during the fourth stage sleep than they do at any other time. So stage 5 indicates sleep paralysis, talking in your sleep, walking in your sleep, because there is a junction between conscious and subconscious that is trying to restart the conscious mind, but it's not fully engaged, but it's enough that the body thinks that it's about to get there. Now, the other thing that happens, and the brain, again, being this magnificent organ that it is, the brain says, look, if you're getting ready to go into the deepest sleep ever, that's death. So every now and then, if you see somebody trying to resist going into sleep or going to sleep because the conscious is still engaged, you will see something called a myoclonic jerk. You know, and that's when people are going to sleep and then their head jumps back up or do that. Well, the brain is saying, look, I'm not ready for you to sleep yet. And if you're going there without my permission, I got to stop that. So people actually jerk back to consciousness, right? So all of that happens. So for a child, this stage 4, because that's where most of the sub-programs are operating, then they go immediately into that operational state for sub-programs, because conscious is minimized. All right. So let me see where we want to go. Okay. All right. I want to make sure, because I don't think I want to go into, let's see, since okay. All right. We're normally to what? 2 o'clock? Okay. All right. So I'm going to save Bowlby and Erickson, because when we get into those, we're literally going to be talking about attachment theory and those kind of things. So we will pick up on Piaget, Erickson, and Bowlby on Tuesday. All right, so we will end this here for the lecture. Are there any specific questions that you'd like to address before we end the day?
I was gonna ask a question.
Yeah, sure.
What causes them to get to stage 5, like of where they're sleep talking? I mean, yeah, they're sleep talking and they're like walking in their sleep and all that.
Yeah, now stress is a big factor in that. So stress can cause it. High level anxiety can cause it. But some of it is literally unconscious behavior, right? Because it's a genetic state where the conscious is not responding to the signals to reactivate. But since you're in a conscious subconscious state, the subconscious state, you're still asleep, but the conscious state is that your muscles are now active. So you can literally get up and walk around. And for those who are talking, remember, talking is the use of the prefrontal cortex, because in the Broca's area, that's where you actually do speech production. So that's a conscious function. So if you're talking in your sleep, that means you're on the bridge between unconscious and subconscious behavior. And so you end up talking in your sleep. Yeah, so sometimes there are triggers, again, stress, anxiety, certain things can lead to it. Some people do, lucid dreaming so that they actually prepare themselves to dream whatever they're going to dream, and then they sort of live it. But other than that, it could simply be a dysfunction, right? One that we don't necessarily control.
I have a question.
Yes, please.
Can this stage also cause hallucinations? Because like you said, during sleep paralysis, some people see things that aren't really there.
Yes. Yeah, because remember, the bridge between what the subconscious is going to envision or work on, even in the state of dreams, is transferred from the conscious. So if the conscious state is not clear in its form, then the brain will make conjecture. The brain will make it up. So you actually can see yourself floating or flying, right? Or I will share this one with you the other night, and I usually don't dream a lot. I have a few, but they usually are positive dreams, not negative ones. But the other night, I literally saw myself, not figuratively, literally, but figuratively, in a bathtub, and my head was below the water, and I couldn't lift my head up. Right? So as far as I'm concerned, that's a strong hallucination. And you know, but I was able to will myself to pull my head up, you know, so that I wouldn't drown. But all of that's in a dream, and I don't know why today I can remember it. But, you know, that can happen because it's a manifestation of our conscious thoughts. And in a lot of instances, and we'll talk about this if we get into Freud a little bit more, but the idea behind Freud's dream analysis is that our dreams tend to be responsive to our unresolved desires and urges. So I may see the most beautiful woman in the world and be deathly afraid to approach her consciously. But then in a dream, I can have her over for dinner. Right? So sometimes we manifest the unconscious desires and urges into our dreams because that's when we can have them.
So it's better if we don't dream?
No, dreams are good, right?
Okay.
Yeah, because it shows fundamental activity and a transfer medium between the conscious and subconscious, that your subconscious really is responsive to your conscious. Yeah, so dreams are not necessarily bad. And usually if they are nightmares or something like that, it's also a manifestation to let you know that there's an unresolved something that you need to address or deal with.
I also have a question.
Yes, please.
Is waking up in like a different stage before you get through the stages, can that be like make you like confused? Because my grandmother, she has Alzheimer's, and sometimes she'll wake up in the middle of the night.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really hard to put her back to bed because she's not fully understanding like it's nighttime, and
Yeah.
it gets worse at night. So I was wondering if there's like if she's waking up in the middle of like her cycles or something, or her stages, or
I honestly don't have a real answer for that one. My thoughts are that she's waking up because, again, the brain activity signals when we're supposed to sleep, when we're not supposed to sleep. And it makes those connections throughout the body to waken the muscles and all of that. If somehow in her neural pathways, the signals that are supposed to be turned off for muscle activity subsequently get turned on, then as far as the body's concerned, the brain says, no, muscles move. But that's as much as I can even offer conjecture about that.
yeah, because I mean it'll be like 2 a.m. She comes out and she's all dressed in her like outfit for the day, and I'm like, no, we need to go back to bed.
Yeah. And that can also, now that's I would say that's a larger function of memory, because a lot of Alzheimer's patients remember certain things. I mean, they literally can remember, you know, when they were in school, you know, or when they walked to the store.
Oh, she does that.
But there are things after that that they absolutely have no recall for. So if one of the very real things for her was getting dressed, then that becomes her fallback whenever she wakes up.
She was a very particular lady, so that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. All right, guys. Well, thank you. Have a great weekend. We will resume on Tuesday. We will finish this chapter and probably move into the next on Tuesday. But until then, thank you for submitting your assignments. I will have those graded, so you should know what your scores are, and I will give you feedback as necessary before next Tuesday. Oh, no. Your first one isn't due yet, is it? Was the first one already due?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Oh, that's right, because I've already been grading some of them. Okay, cool. All right, so yeah, I'll be working on those. And since I don't have classes on Friday, I tend to do a lot of the grading and reading on Friday, so you should have that. Outside of that, thank you, enjoy, and I appreciate the interaction. Take care.
Thank you. Have a good
Thank
week.
you.
Good weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you, Professor.
You're welcome. Take care. Have a good day.
Thank you.